Okay, welcome to this commentary for Zombie. My name is Lee Karr, and I'm here today with a couple of gentlemen who are responsible for this film being made. Michael Gornick.
Hello.
And Tom Dubensky.
Hello.
Thank you guys for joining us today. Bonjour.
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 And you're quite welcome, Lee. And before we begin, I must say that I'm surrounded by two individuals that are a wealth of information. I have Tom Dubensky, who was my assistant camera person on this film, and did an extraordinary job, and did almost what amounts to courtroom steno work in terms of keeping notes on the entire film, much of which he'll relay to you today. And to my right, if you could imagine that, is Lee Karr, who is probably the foremost historian on any of the Romero films.
One of the bigger nerds.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you to Mr. Jim Serenella for arranging all this. Jim is an unsung hero behind the scenes on all of these Blu-ray features. And also I want to mention real quickly, this is both Mike and Tom's first commentary ever for Dawn of the Dead, or Zombie.
The zombie version, yes.
Yes.
The zombie version.
Yes.
Amen. Amen.
Okay, guys, so we're into the film here, and we're actually at Channel 53,
It was Channel 53,
WPGH.
yes.
Right off the bat, then, I guess, so what are some of your memories, guys, of working on this footage? This was actually shot towards the end of production.
It was after we had shot everything in the mall.
Right, it was in February of '78.
Right. Actually, we had done some scenes at the living space. And I think these 2 days were time for the art department to dress up the living space with all the furniture and everything. So, but yeah, this was Channel 53 on the weekend, and this was truly the control room, and you saw George there earlier with Chris and David.
That's a studio engineer.
Yes.
On his headset.
Is that Michael Leese here? I think?
Michael Leese, yeah.
And there's some other people you'll see among there. I'm in there. I run through a couple of shots too.
Now, were all of these people, were any of these people that worked at the TV station itself, or were they all just either crew members or friends?
No, they were. There were some engineer types there. There were some technicians that are mingled within the group that were studio people.
Yeah.
And we used every last inch of the studio itself.
There I am down there waving my arms.
There's Tom Dubensky.
Yes.
Waving his hands in disgust.
Leaving me helpless and shooting.
Well, no, you said I got an empty space down at the bottom of the frame. Go down there and do something. So
Thank you. I did.
There's David Crawford.
Yeah, David Crawford and David Early are great in this movie. Their banter back and forth is fantastic.
David Crawford is still quite active in the Pittsburgh market. Doing voiceover and narration. He's still an actor. David Early, may he rest in peace.
Yes.
A wonderful actor also.
Yes, he would.
Yeah, David Crawford did a play recently, within the last couple of years, over at the New Hazlitt Theater. He did one on Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
Poe's Last Night.
This is David Crawford, and the African American is
David Early.
David Early.
Yes. Most of this was scripted, but I think there are some lines they went off and did some other lines.
Some
on their own.
ad-libbing, yeah.
George would just keep shooting, and they would just keep going on with it. So.
Now, this is Daniel Dietrich. I believe he was a friend of Chris Romero's. And that's Ellen Hopkins, I believe, with the red hair down there next to Galen Ross.
That was Leslie Augenstein, Karl Augenstein's wife.
Yes, she's in the booth.
Oh, there I am again, unplugging.
Karl Augustine, who was my gaffer.
Yes.
We're looking at a version of this that I had the benefit of making a pass on recently for retiming, and I must say to this point it looks very good.
Yes.
The laboratory out of Rome that worked on this did an extraordinary job, and I provided comments over the form of a online communication device called Vimeo, and I could make comments scene to scene, and they did quite a good job, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, it looks fantastic.
Yes, it looks good.
Better than it's ever looked.
It's a very difficult thing to approach because I've often mentioned in the past that this is no longer my film, George's film, it's everyone's film. And we're also familiar with this, that one must be careful about being too heavy-handed in terms of what is called as corrections or revisions on something that has already been shot. But I think this is nicely balanced, and nothing would jump out at you in terms of a difference from the previous versions.
Hold him, where's your badge?
This cop is kind of funny. If you look at his face real closely,
Ed Lettieri.
he looks like he's trying to hold back a smile coming up here in a second. Right there.
Yes. Okay, go. Phenomenon. Should we be unable to check the spread because of the emotional attitudes of the citizenry toward these issues of morality?
This sequence in this version is a bit different than the American one. There's some on-camera bits that were different, and we trimmed some things. But
The President of the United States, citizens may no longer occupy private residences, no matter how...
Well, let's talk a little bit about the financing for the film. What are your memories, Mike, of George finally getting this picture financed through the Italian investors?
Well, we sat upon a lot of promises for months in terms of how and in what fashion we could actually fund this motion picture. It wasn't until Dario stepped forward at some point and said, in essence, that he could certainly do matching funds. We could match his funds, and we could produce this film. And so that gave us the impetus to then move forward. We made our attempts to find matching funds.
yeah, because it was like Dario would have half the world territory, and Laura would have half by a certain date.
Yeah.
And then, because I remember we were going to shoot earlier, and then it kept getting delayed, and with the delays, Laura kept losing territories and such.
In any event, that became part of the negotiations, and you know, his money is represented through Constantine, the film distribution. Their monies, and we were to provide the monies to preserve the English-speaking territories.
Correct.
But in any event, we did not match.
Yeah.
And we wound up producing the film on Dario's money, which amounted to about $500,000, $475,000 to $500,000. Monies subsequently from us came in finishing the film, much later in time.
Was that through Herbert Steinman and Billy Baxter?
That's correct. That's correct. God bless them.
Yeah.
Because we reached a very critical point where we couldn't go any further. We had obviously used Dario's money to produce what you see. And then in post-production, we got deep into a point where we had to do a final dubbing mix of the film, sound work, and laboratory work, quite expensive, and that's where we had to seek funds, and we found our angels, Baxter and Steinman.
Yeah, there was a great interview with George that appeared in the Pittsburgh Press in April of '79 with Ed Blank, who was the movie critic for the Pittsburgh Press. And George talked about some of those early days before that financing came through. He had talked to AIP, American International Pictures. They wanted O.J. Simpson for a lead, which George didn't like that idea at all.
Exactly.
Alfredo Cuomo actually wanted a big name,
Oh.
and he suggested Franco Nero. And again, George was like, you know, you don't really want to go for a big name in a movie like this. So it's interesting, you know, how it played out compared to early on, what the thoughts were. Now, right here, you guys are actually on top of the offices in downtown Pittsburgh for the Late Image on Fort Pitt Boulevard.
On the roof that had no ledge, no restraining thing. It was wide open. And
Didn't bother us.
No, and we were shooting this on a Sunday night, downtown Pittsburgh. And I remember after some of these shots, I said, gee, you know, people going to dinner and such, shouldn't we let the police know we're shooting a movie and shooting guns? Because otherwise people might call in and wonder what's going on. And so some of the office did call, and the police said, well, thanks for letting us know. No one said anything, but thanks for letting us know about that. Which I guess comes from my days as a student, film student in New York City. It's like, well, you got to let the cops know what you're doing, otherwise they're going to do that.
So we're now deep into a sequence of visual and a whole montage of events that George proposed when he began thinking about making this film. And his thoughts were that in every 6 minutes, there had to be a zets that would knock you off your chair. And if you sit around and time these, you can see that, yes, every 6 minutes I am actually aghast at what has just transpired. It's much like Janet Maslin said in her first review of the film, that she could sit through about 15 minutes of the film and she had to leave.
Yeah, she never saw the rest of the movie.
And here we go. Here's one of my favorite
This is the big
sequences.
one.
Oh, nuts. I hate when that happens. My favorite line's coming up, though. Wooly, he's out of control.
Willie's gone ape shit.
Yeah, Willie's gone ape shit. That's a great line.
Willie's Jim Baffico, who was teaching at Carnegie Mellon University in the drama department. and produced the first feature film I edited. Plus, I think Karr was in Pittsburgh, so.
Not that room, not that room.
There he goes.
Which turns out to be the same room he just blew the guy's head off, and you
Yeah.
can see his body laying there on the floor.
Yes.
You guys shot these particular scenes at the Glen Hazel Project.
That's correct.
Right.
An actual housing project in the city of Pittsburgh.
Which was abandoned, and they had tied electricity, but there was no heat at all. So any heat was from the lights or anything else, and so it was very cool. And
This is one of many shooting locations that at the time, George had charmed the city of Pittsburgh.
yes,
And I remember meeting with the head of housing for the city of Pittsburgh, Dan Petrogallo, and didn't bother reading the script. Could care less. It was George Romero. You want to use a place? We'll give you one.
it was
How's
empty.
this?
It was empty, and I said, "Here, use it." So that was it.
Little do they know.
Yes, really.
There's Renee
Renee
Banks,
Banks, yes.
is the plaid shirt zombie attacking.
John Rice.
John Rice.
John Rice is actually part of my technical team also.
Yes, yes, and he teaches film at Point Park University, and some of his students will use this scene in some of their projects of people when they're watching TV or something.
Yeah.
John will say, "Well, if you think that's going to help your grade at all, you're sadly mistaken." So,
The zombie that's trying to get to John Rice, his name was Gary Peabody, and he was a real amputee. Tony Buba told me that he had lost his leg, he believes, in a fall. So he really was missing part of his leg.
From a public housing towers in Braddock.
Yeah, possibly.
Yes, that's how it happened.
Is it?
Yeah.
Here's Tommy Lafitte.
And when you least expect it, here's your first
yes, they're
Zets.
the first. Yes.
Here is your Zets.
Tommy Lafitte later turned up in movies like Silence of the Lambs and Jack Reacher. If you've seen Jack Reacher with Tom Cruise, he's the guy at the bus stop that gives his baseball cap to Tom Cruise.
Oh.
And then they get on the bus together, and then Cruise gives his cap back to him.
All these scenes were somewhat early in our filming process, and I remember thinking to myself, Savini is insane.
Yeah.
How does he pull this off?
Yeah. This was the last things we did before the break, before the holiday break, I think. Yeah. So
That was correct.
So that was December. So there's no. It's December, mid-December, and it's cold, and there's no heat in the building. And
But we didn't care.
But that whole first half, November, December, we shot the first half, and it was just cold.
Yeah, according to your schedule, Tom, you guys spent in total around 5 days.
Yeah, 5 days. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure that was a lot of fun.
I'm not sure we had home. Did we ever go home?
A few days.
We shot well into the night.
Oh yeah,
Into the morning.
Yeah, I had times for that too. The exterior, which we saw at the beginning with the guys rappelling off, that was the front of the building, and we shot everything inside the building. The only thing related to the project that was not shot the project was the roof, which was
Okay.
at Fort Pitt. But this was in the project and everything else too. This might have been our first big dramatic dialogue.
Oh,
scene.
absolutely.
Yeah, it was
Yes, it
actually.
was, yeah.
Yeah. In the
And
basement somewhere.
a great performance.
Yes.
And then you suddenly realize that you had some talent working, which is
True.
refreshing. You know, it wasn't just going to be horror and gore.
Yeah, because all the other things we did, even on the roof, was like, come over here, run over here,
Right,
there'd be a few lines, but this was the
Exactly.
first, and this is what we first got to see, really, the two of them acting together,
And we could do a formal setup. We could actually think about a scene, create some lighting mood, some
Yes,
conditions.
true.
We never could. Everything else is pretty much almost documentary style.
Yeah.
We get to a location and try to shoot it out as quickly as possible.
Now, these SWAT uniforms that they're wearing, Josie Caruso, who's the costume lady on the film, she told me she picked all the SWAT uniforms up on Canal Street in New York City.
Huh.
That was her memory of getting those. And then when it came to just regular clothes that the characters wear in the film, she just took them shopping.
Yeah.
And they just picked out what they wanted that way.
I'm still wearing that plaid shirt. hanging on the clothesline.
Now, who knew Jesse, the priest?
George had seen him in a couple of theatrical productions in Pittsburgh, so
Okay.
he and Chris
Okay.
brought him forward to act in his film.
Yeah, I think George met him originally through the YMCA, when George would work on productions like early on when he first came to Pittsburgh.
Because they seemed to know each other,
Absolutely.
but I didn't know who they were at the time and everything.
He is not a Catholic priest.
No. And he's not Puerto Rican. Is he Puerto Rican?
No, he is not.
Because the idea was this is a Puerto Rican
It's a mixture.
housing. Yes, that's
Yes.
why John Ampelis does his Puerto Rican accent. You know,
Philadelphia housing.
That's true. Yes.
He's really good in this, though. He's very convincing, I thought. And with that missing leg, he's quite
Oh,
good.
absolutely.
Yeah, well, you don't see it till later. It's like, oh.
Stronger than us. Well, soon, I think. Way stronger than you.
I remember we took our time with this. We shot a lot of angles and there was a lot of talk and everything, and it's like we covered it.
Stop the killing or lose the war.
Now this plays different in George's version. In George's version, when they knock it open, the zombies just immediately come out, which makes much more sense than the delay.
I always thought this was sort of a homage to like the original Living Dead with the hands coming through the walls and everything. It always reminded me of that, and I thought, gee, this is...
This is a great example, too, of a zombie horde that didn't have a lot of direction,
Right.
but seemingly had some understanding about what the mindless might perform as. you know.
Right.
Now we're about to get into some more of Savini's effects here.
Here comes the Zets again.
Yeah.
The 6-minute Zets.
That's, yeah. There's one coming up I want to talk about. This was down in the basement of the project, yeah.
The same
building,
house, that's right.
Is one of those guys the extra Ron Gibson that you talked about?
The very first shot is Ron Gibson.
He shows up again at the mall. He's
Throughout the mall, yeah.
He's the zombie that...
He's our sambalist zombie.
He's the one that chases after Ken Foray like he's Frankenstein's monster with his arms outstretched.
There's one, George says, give me a squirt bottle with some blood in it. And he got a squirt bottle with some blood. And then it's coming up. Then he stood right by the camera lens.
Right
and there it
there.
goes. And then the blood squirted right in front of the lens.
These are all blanks, too, being fired directly at camera.
True, or your hand, yes. Yeah, well, that's the other thing we learned. Oh, Robert Williams, the boom person. There.
He would later show up in Night Riders as the hacks guy.
Yeah. But that's true. We learned blanks don't shoot.
They shoot wads.
Little wads,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
Well, there was a tragic incident maybe about 10 years subsequent from this film being shot. The actor was actually killed by a wad.
Because people think, oh, it's a blank, nothing comes out. What they actually do.
Still relieve this respect and die.
Okay, now we're over near the police dock.
This is the police dock.
Downtown Pittsburgh.
Yeah. This part of the scene is not in the final release, but it's in this one because it starts later in the theatrical release. It starts with the head coming back. Or this part isn't. But we shot there about 3 days at the police dock.
I like this opening.
Yeah.
This is supposed to represent, I think, like her first time kind of out into the world during the zombie phenomenon. That's why she's shocked to see the body laying there.
Life outside the studio.
Yeah. I think this is George's voice over the radio,
yeah.
isn't it?
And I think he did it live, if I remember.
He did indeed, yes.
Yes. He was on another one, and they just recorded it while we were shooting.
It's not coming in at all. Hello, HQ. This is police dock. Operator dead. Post abandoned. Repeat. Operator dead. Post abandoned. I guess that's the police dock. Identify yourself, please.
Wow, classic.
There we go.
Okay, so now we've got our 4 characters here all together.
Right.
Do you guys know the last names of our 4 characters?
I do not. I'm
Okay.
anxious to hear it.
Steve
Okay, well-
Andrews is Steve, but here's the shot of the Westinghouse building. We were shooting there one night, we noticed the lights going off, and George said, hey, do we know what time they do that? So then the next time we went there, it was like 6 o'clock, and we all synchronized our watches, and we waited, and we're waiting for we're rolling film, and we're waiting for the lights to go off, and finally they did, and we let it go.
That was actually then known as the U.S. Steel
Yeah,
Building.
U.S. Steel Building.
U.S. Steel Building.
But they did it the same every night.
Okay, so our 4 characters' names are, of course, Steve Andrews.
Steve Andrews, thank you.
Francine Parker.
Oh, okay.
Peter Washington.
Oh.
And Roger DeMarco.
Excellent. Thank you.
Now that's in the novelization.
Yeah.
For all of you hardcore nerds out there
Yes.
who appreciate stuff like that, in case you were wondering.
Credit to Susan Sparrow.
Yes.
The mysterious Susanna Sparrow.
Passed about an hour ago. And we're pretty low on
We shot these at the heliport
Waiting for full light.
in Burgettstown, where they have the helicopter.
Right. The owner of this helicopter has
Yeah.
a minor
Right.
hangar for his
Yeah.
helicopter, and that's where we shot
We had
those.
some grips moving it back and forth to give some subtle movement.
Yes, Bartholomew.
Yes.
Thank
He
you.
was the helicopter pilot, and he had a company. He was president of his own company, Royal Helicopter Service.
That's right, yeah.
He was a Vietnam vet. He had been
He was
injured
indeed.
in the war. He had been shot in the arm when he was ferrying troops back and forth. His gunner got killed when that happened, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, George shot some of these. That shot, these shots here, because he was on. Well, you did some, Mike. You just shot some of this ground stuff, and then you broke away, and then George was shooting some of this, and
Right.
then you broke away, did some other stuff. Because we were at the National Guard. And,
Yeah, I began doing some handheld
Right.
throughout
Yeah.
this and
Yeah.
set up shots, and then we went off into the field.
Because you and Nick went into the field, and
More
George and I were
graphics.
with the 2C that Laurel had. He just walked around with it and set it up.
The one guy with the bandage on his head right there in the beer is Bill Lasco. He went on to be a featured zombie in Day of the Dead. He's the one that bites Carrie Clark on the neck.
Oh.
Wow.
This was shot at the Beatty Farm
Oh,
in
okay.
Monroeville, which is right next door to the airport.
Which was Brownie Field, owned by Mr. and Mrs. Brown.
Harold W. Brown Memorial Field.
In there, by your car. Get the gas.
Yes, we shot this the day before Thanksgiving, I think.
Yeah, the Posse
yeah,
Redneck stuff was
yeah,
the day
it's all
before
the
Thanksgiving
Thanksgiving.
of 1977.
We got the National Guard to come out and do all that stuff. Because we did have Thanksgiving off, and then we went back to work the day after Thanksgiving.
That guy right there with the
Joe Abel.
tassel
Joe
cap
Abel.
on. Joe
Yeah,
Abel.
Joe Abel.
Jefferson Street, Joe Abe.
He's the zombie that bites off Ralph Morero's fingers in Day of the Dead.
Oh, okay.
And here we are at the airport. It opened in 1950 and was originally called the Wilkinsburg-Pittsburgh Air Park Brown Aviation Center.
Went there many times in my youth
Did you?
as a 7-year-old to watch planes take off and land.
Oh, okay.
Well, by the time you guys shot this, it was already kind of run down.
Many of these fields that dotted the landscape of western Pennsylvania were built right after World War II. There was a frustration by many of those who served in World War II as pilots who came back now to the States, and they wanted to keep flying. So a lot of these little fields popped up throughout western Pennsylvania
Yes.
and the United States. And the gentleman had private planes, and thus Brownie's Field.
Yeah, he had passed away about 10 years prior to you guys filming, and his widow, Helen, she actually ran the airfield, as a matter of fact.
Again, I think we had zero in terms of location fees, full cooperation. You want to shoot here? Thanks, fine. Well, welcome and enjoy yourself.
Oh, the WGON logo you see on the helicopter was done
Yeah.
by Joe Eberly, who was the artist who had an office at Fort Pitt. And they would stick that logo on.
So he's the one that designed it.
Yeah.
It was his design. He's actually a cousin-in-law of George's
Right,
through
yeah.
marriage. Yeah.
I believe that's Bomba's father right there.
Yeah, I
attacking.
think
That's right.
yeah. And I'm trying to remember. I think it was a crew. Was that zombie a crew person? Was that Daniel Silk or was that somebody else?
That's not Dan Silk.
Always wondered that. Who
Oh,
that
then
guy
he's
was.
the one in the truck depot then, okay. I couldn't remember which one.
And these are Tom Savini's niece and nephew here
Yeah.
attacking Ken. You can see George's hand right there real quick. Comes into the view of the camera. I guess he was directing Ken to throw him onto the couch.
Ken actually had a hard time with the scene, even
Having to slaughter the kids.
slaughter kids.
You know, one difference between George's version and this version, Dario's version, is that Jim Crut is completely removed. The helicopter zombie
That's right.
is not included in this sequence at all. And that's Paul Musser there playing the most iconic zombie from the film. Became the poster. Paul was in a band called Fluid, along with Mike Christopher, who plays the Hare Krishna zombie. Here's another interesting thing. This line of dialogue from Galen Ross is not in the U.S. theatrical version.
Peter, my God, what are you doing?
Right there. In the U.S. theatrical, she just goes, Peter.
Well, also, there's a line they pulled when he doesn't really say it.
Isn't it?
No.
Yeah, and it ends there too as well, but in George's extended cut, you actually see Ken Furry pick him up. He picks him up off the
Picks
ground
him
and
up?
pats him, yeah.
That's correct.
Which I think they should have left in because it lets them know, okay, there's no hard feelings, we're going to get past it.
Anything like Philly, we may never get out of line.
We may never get out of any place.
Now, even though these were shot in
Getting out of here
at the heliport, correct?
That's
Right.
correct.
Right.
You had to go up in the helicopter quite a bit to film, is
I
that
did.
right?
I did, yeah. And it was strictly handheld, and I don't think even Tom came along most
One
cases.
time,
Yeah.
because you wanted to be able to change magazines real fast. So I was
Right.
in the back seat, and then you ran out.
But
and
these
then-
early ones, I think,
Yeah.
were simply myself and
I went up once because you said it was a big zombie day at the mall, and it's like, quick, I want to just load mags. So I had a magazine in the back seat, and then when you just handed me one, I did that was it. I wanted to point out in the night scene in the helicopter, there's the subtle red flashing light that Mike always wanted visible somewhere in the frame. So. There's the helipad, which they built, so we could land the helicopter.
And we were damn steady because there's a lot of wash in this helicopter as he arrives and lands.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, that helicopter years later would go on to become Chopper 11 for WPXI here in Pittsburgh.
Really?
Yeah, and he also flew it for under contract for the television station.
I love these moments up on the roof.
Yeah.
The atmosphere, the softness. Evenness of the day. Our first look inside.
For a shot like that, were you up on scaffolding?
Yeah.
Second floor. The big department stores usually use.
Because I know I've seen-
Because the actual skylights were left a pretty obscure look into the.
I would think so,
Yeah, frosted.
Yeah, we didn't have scaffolding.
There's footage, I think it may be from Document of the Dead. It's some behind-the-scenes footage where you can see Mike on the scaffolding, and your head's literally up inside the ceiling tile.
Oh, yeah.
Ceiling tile is like pushed to the side.
Those high angles and the POV, where Ken's looking down through the grate and
Yeah.
everything from the ductwork and everything, we're all scaffolding.
Same thing with a shot like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It was an important place in their lives.
Yeah, and we had I think our widest lengths, we had like a 16 millimeter,
yeah.
which wasn't as fast as the super speeds, but it was wide enough we could get those. See. Here's our phony skylight that we had built to put on the roof so that we could.
Who built all this stuff, like the helicopter landing pad and the fake skylight?
Most of the heavy construction was done by an individual called Matt Clancy, who was a graduate of CMU. Later went on to become actually a medical surgeon, but at the time was doing a lot of set work on plays locally and so forth, and he was our master carpenter for the whole film.
And he worked on the loft set, which we're
Yeah,
into
right
now.
Here we are.
do,
Here
yeah.
we are.
Now, this was shot in a building just a few doors down from the offices on Fort
Right.
Pitt Boulevard,
That's correct.
Same landlord, so he had this empty building, and
Again, no charge, oddly enough. He was a fan.
You can't beat
Very-
that.
He was a supporter of George.
Right.
He had a derelict building in which we shot these scenes, and again, unheated.
True, no
Et
heat.
cetera, et cetera.
But it had a skylight, so at least we had that connection there. But true, it was an empty building. You had to walk up these rickety steps to where they had built the set. No heat.
At one point, there was a small fire in this set. Is that correct? In the
That's
ceiling?
right. Yeah, there was a small fire. Yeah.
Dan. No.
And those are actual civil defense boxes that Mike and me and Tony and Nick we got from the state office building. They didn't want them.
We actually have a variety of
Or for
sites.
outplace.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the
These-
sanitation kits and all that. Those are the actual civil defense boxes.
Did you guys have to return those, or did you just
They
discard
they
them?
were more than happy to give them to us.
Yes.
And get rid of them, because they were a product of the 50s during the whole
Right,
duck and
right.
cover world of civil defense, and every large office building or state office building, federal buildings had these civil defense supplies in the basement in the event of a nuclear attack.
Wow.
I remember you rented a truck and we filled the whole truck full of this stuff. And I can't remember if we stored it at the studio or in this.
They were
this
in
building. The
at
studio
Fort
for
Pitt,
Fort
247, and at the conclusion of the filming, we gave them to a pig farmer outside of Monroeville.
You did? Well, I mean, pigs can use sanitation kits sometimes, so.
But there were crackers and hard candy and then water, cans of water.
Cracker,
and
that's
all
right,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
This place could be a gold mine. We got to at least check it out.
This is exactly what we're trying to get away from. Look what... Stephen!
Leave him be. We're going ourselves. That's ready to
You know,
shoot.
there was no heat, so between setups they had these jet heaters where they bring in and blow hot air in, and then when we were done, they'd pull them back. And sometimes after, depending which way we were shooting, they'd have to put up the other wall, so we were closed in.
Right.
Depending which, and then we'd be done, and they'd open it up and put the jet heaters in.
They left
Yeah.
a despicable odor behind.
That's
though,
true,
all
yeah,
that
yeah.
propane burning.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I can imagine.
That stairway is exactly the same today as it was back then too.
Now, the Monroeville Mall, it opened in 1969, and it was located on the former grounds of the Thomas Harper Coal Company strip mine. And they had to move just millions of cubic yards of earth to basically flatten out so that they could build the mall on it. It was a project of Don Mark Realty, which later became Oxford Development. And George was friendly with, I believe, Mark Mason from the mall.
Right.
And that's how they got their little connection.
Again, little to no resistance from Mark Mason, who managed the mall, was head of Oxford. And his only requirement of us, obviously, was to clear wherever we shot within the mall with the vendors or the corporations
Yes.
that housed themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, there's only like a few stores, I think, that didn't agree to be...
The two major ones, though, were problematical. They were at the far ends of the mall, and so we had to be very, very careful. They were at the time, they were the Joseph Horn Company on one end, and
Gimbals.
Gimbals on the
right,
other.
yeah.
Right.
The
So
top was separate.
with those restrictions, it was somewhat difficult, but we pulled it through.
And during the day, sometimes either Donna Siegel or someone from the office would go there to say, oh, could you keep your lights on tonight because we're going to be shooting in this area or that area? Or, could someone be here? We want to shoot in your store, or we might shoot in your store, and that
Right.
sort of thing. So they would set up during the day because then we'd come in the evening, after the stores were closed to set up and start shooting and everything.
I believe that's Tasso doing
Tasso-
Yeah, that's Tasso doing
Tassos
the
Stavrakis,
yeah.
yes, who became
Clay-
seen in many,
and
many
then-
scenes.
yes,
that.
yes.
These mini zombies.
Yes.
And a biker.
Where there's difficulty, blood, and gore, it's
Yes,
Tasso.
and stunts for him.
And
He and Tom Savini did all the stunts. This is Tasso too.
And we just saw a shot of the clock tower. The clock tower was actually designed by a lady named Jerry Cavanaugh. Geraldine's her real name. She goes by Jerry. And she had designed one as well for Midtown Plaza in Rochester, New York. And so she was contacted about designing another clock tower for the Monroeville Mall. And she said that originally it was designed for it to be in the center of the mall, It wasn't supposed to be in the West Court, which is where it ended up.
Yeah.
And the dolls, she said the little figurines inside were made from paper mache. They came out every hour on the hour, and they were supposed to represent the 12 ethnic communities of Pittsburgh.
Oh. J.C. Penney was very cooperative. I don't know if we could have done it without help of J.C. Penney.
Yeah, they were the third anchor store at the mall, and Tom is right. There'd be no possibility of this film being made without their cooperation.
That zombie that just got his head blown off, his name is John Hayden. He came back recently a couple years ago to Pittsburgh to do a play, a double bill with David Crawford, called Diary of a Madman. And he's originally from Atlanta, and he was going to school at CMU. And he appeared not too long ago in a very small role in Anchorman 2. So if there's any comedy fans out there watching this, you'll see that guy in Anchorman 2, and he looks totally different now, obviously, 40 years later. Very nice guy.
You know, this is a very low-profile production. We weren't advertising for zombies or anything like that. The word just got out,
Yes.
and they would show up.
I think John Amplis was
We did, yeah.
the head of that.
He was our so-called casting director for zombies.
Yes. And I think what John did was, which was very smart, was he went around to a lot of the local universities and was putting up flyers to let people know.
And we shot all the interiors after the Christmas holiday. That's why we shot everything outside first, shot everything inside after the holidays, while all decorations were gone. And, you know, the stores closed at 9:30, so we would move in around 10, start unpacking. Mike and George would walk around, talk about what they were going to shoot, so like by 11, 12, midnight, we would start shooting. And then the Muzak would come on at 7, and the mall walkers came at 7:30, so we were limited as far as how much we could really get done each night.
Once the music came on at 7, you guys had to shoot MOS, is that correct?
I remember the first night of the mall walkers, you know, I saw this line of people coming down, and I had the tripod in the middle of the aisle because we were trying to decide if we were going to shoot something or not. And I see this wall of people coming toward me. I'm thinking, well, they see this tripod, I'm sure they're going to break, and clearly they weren't. So I grabbed it and pulled it to the side just as they're about to pass. So.
They should have slapped some grease paint on them and filmed them too. They could have just been, you know, mall walker zombies.
They walk too fast.
Yeah. They wanted their exercise.
Yeah. No, they were serious. Like, okay, well, we can't do this.
Why, of course you can exchange. That's very important during the zombie apocalypse. I got to do this once when the mall was actually open years ago.
However, they have subsequently put actual barriers now, if you've noticed, in the center, so you can't do that anymore.
Well, a lot of places do that, yeah. And unfortunately, Penny's has now moved.
But throughout the mall itself.
That's Denise Kiss and John Kiss, those two zombies that appeared right after each other. Denise and John Kiss. They were dating. They were in college at the time. And they came out to the mall quite a bit. They were all throughout the film. And they're still married to this day. Two of the nicest people you'll ever meet.
Just give it time. Give it time.
So part of what I did recently in terms of retiming is that in those interior mall scenes, particularly Penny's, we had to live because we couldn't do any conversions in terms of the tubes above us. But we did have a whole series of tubes which are called chromolars, which we could use typically when we were doing something more intimate and contained and change fluorescent lighting. But there in Penny's, we went as is.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of cyan that goes on here that kind of disturbs the scene. But in my most recent timing, we were able, because of a new digital world, to pull out a lot of that cyan. And I think it feels better, actually.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that, about the lighting.
You can see it here. You know, you see the chromolars playing up out of the fluorescence.
It's all fluorescent, everything was
but it's our fluorescence there as opposed to Penny's and much of the mall.
Yeah.
This is back to cyan. These are corrected because we got a little tighter. We can control it with our own stands of fluorescence that we brought with us.
The Augie Tran. We put
The Augie Tran, we call it,
We
yes.
put a fluorescent light on a light stand, and then we could fill in with...
In a vertical position.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
Right.
So we could simulate the softness of the fluorescence.
So that way everything was fluorescent, and then they could just time from that. It's when you get trouble is when you start mixing.
Right.
You know,
Like these shots
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I think Augie went through and checked to make sure all the lights in pennies, like that there were no like flickering.
That was the other problem. Yeah.
So he made sure they were all of the bulbs were working and
And none of the ballasts were flickering.
Right. Yeah.
It's quite a chore.
Because we were shooting all over the store. We didn't want to go under a bank where there was no light, and where both bulbs were gone, or one was only lit, or something like that. So I think he did that much just to check that. And that was.
This is an actual machine room at the mall?
Yes.
Yeah, this is the boiler room at the mall, and that's Warner Shook,
Warner Shook?
who went on to be a Pulitzer Prize-winning director,
Open up. I can get the wagon open.
very respected stage director.
Outside? Okay.
But he started out as a zombie for George Romero.
Well, he went on to Night Riders,
Night
and
Riders and Creep Show.
Creep Show, that's right.
He directed some Tales from the Dark Side. Dark Side or Monsters. He directed some of the shows.
Dark Side.
Yeah, Dark Side.
Now, you also used a special lens at the time that had been designed for or created for Stanley Kubrick when he made Barry Lyndon. Is that correct? It was a Zeiss
The Zeiss Super Speed was a set. It was a set of 4 lenses that Carl Zeiss had. Well, he designed them for Kubrick. Kubrick wanted to shoot under candlelight,
Right.
so they designed these lenses, and then they weren't quite as fast as the ones that Kubrick had, but we're able to shoot. They were wide open, faster lenses, so we could shoot more available light. We still had to push one stop some.
Kubrick's demand at the time were 1-foot candles.
Right.
And we were near those conditions
Yeah.
many times. But
Yeah.
our super speed saved us. They were very costly. We couldn't rent them on a continuing basis. So we had them quite often. We could call for them when we knew we had
We
scenes.
had them, then we sent them back during the break, and then we got the exact same ones when we went back.
That intimate scene with Fran and Flyboy when they're having dinner late one night.
Yeah.
That's a whole scene that was shot with the super
Yeah.
speed.
Yeah.
Now,
I might say the Grand Marquee that's back there, that was an empty storefront.
yes.
So they wouldn't want to look like an empty storefront, so the art department made it look like it was a sale and put up the sign. So, because we were always shooting in that direction, and we didn't want something empty back there.
Well, that's just a quick, easy, and clever way
Yeah.
to hide it. When you guys learned that you were going to actually be filming at the mall, what kind of prep work did you guys do? Did you go out to the mall and scout it? And
We did.
What steps you took?
I remember George and I going out and just looking at general locations and possible angles that we could then pass on to Mr. Rubenstein, our producer out of New York, in terms of negotiating angles within the mall, so we could reach some sort of reality of, can we actually shoot this way in this direction? How wide of a shot can we have?
Right.
Tom and I, in turn, did some tests.
We went. I remember we walked on the lower level with a light meter, because there were certain areas. I mean, they had lights, but they were recessed into the ceiling, and so we realized when we were going to shoot down there, we did need some extra light, and we did put some little like Minimax or something in there just to bring the general level up, so we could at least get enough exposure, particularly like when the motorcycles go
going
right through there. Yeah.
Yeah, so we looked at those kinds of conditions in the mall. Plus, we did some testing there just to look at, how some of the fluorescence would react on film to our 47 stock.
Yeah, that was the other thing. 52-47 had just come out a couple years earlier.
God
which was-
bless it, yeah.
Yeah, which was much faster than the
54.
than 54.
Yeah, the old 54 stock.
This is
And
the film stock you guys
right,
That's correct, yes.
And it was a finer grain, so like we could push one stop and it wouldn't really cause a lot of grain and stuff like the other one would have. So between the super speeds and pushing the negative one stop, we were able to at least have enough light, have enough exposure for a certain amount of depth of field.
Yeah, not to get too technical, for the layman
Right,
out
yeah.
there, but can you guys talk about that, about pushing one stop, so we can understand that? a little bit?
There's two processes that we used. Principally here on Dawn of the Dead, we used this forced processing later,
Right.
which just means you leave it longer in the bath. And it's pretty exacting. We had luckily a very savvy laboratory in Technicolor, New York, and a gentleman, Joey Villante, who was our coordinator there. And we could do that kind of extended exposure and give us another f-stop or two as we shot. Later in time, then, we in turn also did something which was called pre-flashing, which actually brings down the toe areas, the heavy concentrated look of a contrasty white to black contrast by this pre-flashing process that we could also do at the laboratory, which reduced that heavy contrast. So combine that with the 47 stock, which Tom has mentioned had just arrived on the scene. We shot something called 52-47, which means it's the 35 millimeter stock. There was a 16 millimeter version of it too, 72-47. And it was a marvel. It was a marvel.
Yeah.
Again, we probably couldn't have shot this film with the old 54 stock.
We would have needed so much light, which would have ruined the look at the mall. It wouldn't have looked like the mall, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this elevator is the elevator plans, but this elevator shaft is the shaft at 247 Fort Pitt in the office.
Yep. The old latent image offices.
I wanted to mention that discussion they had by the carpets where they were talking. I remember a long discussion about screen direction when we were shooting that.
Who
looks where at what? And
we always had screen direction
then I
discussion.
remember, then finally George said, "Man, as long as their eyes meet, as long as their eyes look, look like you're looking at each other, we're fine."
Well, I wanted to go back briefly to the scene with John Harrison, who plays this zombie that gets the screwdriver in the ear.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, that was added strictly for continuity because there was a problem where there was a scene where Scott Reiniger has the sweater tied around his waist, and then it wasn't tied around his waist, and so they realized that they needed to go back and show why is he missing his sweater, so that's why John Harrison was brought in.
The other thing I remember was like, well, I don't know if it was George or Savini brought up this, is there another way we can kill a zombie in the head other than just shooting? And that's when he came up with the idea, well, the screwdriver. So I don't know if it was one or the other.
It was
both.
actually a product of both.
Yeah.
I think it gave Savini another opportunity.
Right.
And he thought it might be a clever way to also end the zombie's life.
Yeah.
Or at least delay any further action by the zombie.
Speaking of Savini, I guess we can talk about him and some of the incredible contributions that he made to this film and why it's so popular to this day, as a matter of fact. What are some of your recollections of being on set with Tom Savini?
Tom Savini is always a constant source of enthusiasm and uplifting spirit that oftentimes, you need on a set. And it seemed like those moments where we were preparing or about to create an effect on film with Tom. And one must remember that in that era, in that age of filmmaking, everything was live on set. We didn't know of CGI. We had no possibility of doing any kind of exotic opticals. So we were creating it right on set. And it was all Tom's genius. And he, having been a former photographer in Vietnam, was very, very savvy in terms of our needs and how he could better perform with us in conjunction with photography. And so it was always a joy, always a gentleman, always enthusiastic, very, very helpful, often very creative. He gave us insights in terms of how to better shoot his material.
Yeah.
So it was a joy to have him around.
Self-taught. That's one of the things I've always admired about him was he was a self-taught guy. He didn't have the privilege of other makeup artists who were working with him, showing him how to do things. He had to teach himself how to do all of this stuff, magic tricks, basically.
I want to make one observation as I listen to this also, and we watch, that the group overseas, the Italian group, has done a sensational job of Foley work. There's a lot of Foley here.
That was not in the...
Absolutely. George and I did all the Foley for the motion picture, and at times we were limited by time and budget. But I notice here that there's a lot of great subtlety, and so kudos to them.
Yeah, there was running around Penny's, you could hear a lot of footsteps and jingling keys and stuff like that, which I don't remember in the American version.
And for the uninitiated, what happens oftentimes when you're shooting on set, you lose a lot of all the subtle sound effects. People putting down pencils or clipboards or whatever gets lost. When you go back and do a finish on a motion picture, you want to add those kind of subtleties that brings... You just saw one there when they drop the body. There's some clothing that makes a rustle that I don't think we had in our version, but is there now. Grabbing the handle of or the arm of the stairs.
Well, right before that scene, right before they come in and rescue Fran from the Hare Krishna zombie, there was a deleted scene. It's in the script, but I want to talk a little bit about it, what your memories were. There's a scene where the three characters, Flyboy, Peter, and Roger, sneak into the mall president's office, and they find him dead where he had killed himself. Do you guys remember why that wasn't shot? Because it was mentioned even on a call sheet.
No, I remember the shot, and I remember our enthusiasm about that. We actually had scouted a location, at least I did with George at some point, and it happened to be an old friend of mine from high school, Gary Sermatz, who was the PR director of the mall, and we were going to use that very office. And I don't think we had identified who was going to portray the mall president. It may have been Mark Mason, as far as I know, but
Right.
Time being what it is, and our schedule there at the mall,
Yeah,
there was
we
no
never-
time for another shot.
Yeah.
So.
We never shot.
And we seemed like we had enough material. I think George was doing some pre-cutting before we got to some final cuts, and I think he realized he had enough material at some point, so he could let that one go.
Well, there were other things in the script that got left out from the film. In the script, and in the novel as well, they have a puppy.
Right.
Do you guys remember why? Was it just going to be too difficult to
Yeah.
worry about during
Yeah.
filming?
It was
It's strictly
much,
that,
yeah.
yeah. But it is missed. I missed dogs and babies.
During the zombie apocalypse, yes. Yeah, the dog's name was going to be Adam.
Right.
And in the film, he didn't survive. In the novelization, he does. She takes him away in the helicopter with her, but in the film, he got killed by this horde of zombies coming up the steps. And also another difference from the script to the film was that originally the zombies were supposed to be kept in the bank vault
Right.
and not in the freezer.
Right.
And even when Roger dies, they just throw him in there as well.
Part of it, yeah.
Instead of burying him. What are your recollections of that and why that changed? Was it just...
I remember, I know we were shooting, we were waiting for, we were in the mall, and we were waiting for something, and George saw that area with all the vegetation and everything, and he looked at it, was looking at it, and that might be an interesting thing, and then later, I don't know if talking with Ken or whatever, they came up with the idea, we could bury somebody there and do
Right.
that sort of thing. So he was always looking, around the mall and coming up with ideas and things.
And the bank vault versus the freezer was that we couldn't possibly convince Pittsburgh National Bank to give us the vault. Seriously.
That
That was it. That's pretty much it. And actually, the freezer was far more intriguing. I
Yeah,
thought,
yeah.
Plus, it would keep down on the smell, which probably would
I
have
think that
eventually-
made good
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Exactly
I mean,
right.
yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was actually a blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, on one hand, I mean, it is a great visual idea because George describes in the script about Roger's body being thrown in there, and it's almost like some sort of a portrait from hell of him on top of all these other dead people. And that shows you just how fragile the whole situation was, that here's your friend who's now just another
Right.
piece of dead meat, as opposed to the way it ends up in the movie, which I think is better, where
Yeah.
he shows
With the
respect to
dog
his
tags,
friend.
to his friend
Yeah.
and everything.
I think that works
And then
much
the
better.
dinner scene, between the two that Peter cooks for Fran and
Right.
Steve, and then he
goes to see his friend, yeah. I like that much better. A little more human touch.
Yes.
to the film.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, when he was writing the script, he was in Italy, and I remember Chris saying, Dario they signed off on every page as he was writing it, so it was, just to get a script together, so there was still time. Again, just walking around the mall, George would get ideas, we could shoot this, or how about this, or, hey, Mike, can you do a shot something like this, or you would say, hey, George, I could do something here, And what amazed me was that George, rarely looked through the camera. I mean, occasionally, like he'd set up something, he'd look at it. and-
If invited, he didn't seem to want.
or you'd say, well, look, I can only get this because something's in the way, and then he'd look at it, and I'd have to make sure I'd have to unlock the tripod because sometimes he'd want to move the camera to see, well, can you reframe? It's like, well, maybe you could, or maybe you couldn't.
Prey
So.
on each other. That's the difference. They attack and they feed only.
Now here we can hear the voice of Richard France.
Seemingly.
And a perfectly good explanation of the zombies and what their
Yes.
problems are.
Now, these things that he's saying, these are all scripted.
Yes, they
In
are.
George's
Yeah.
script, but later on when he's having the interaction
He
with
went
Howard
off
Smith, they
went-
just sort of
went
made up their
off,
own
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
He said that the agreement they had with George was, we're going to do this, and George said, okay, well, if I don't like it, we'll go back to the script.
Yeah.
But George liked what they were doing.
Well, they went on for a bit. It's like, so he cut it and rephrased, cut it and we just organized things so that.
Instinct.
And the eye patch that he wears, He said that that was George's idea because his character was so similar to the Dr. Watts character from The Crazies.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They discussed this, and he said the next day when they came in for filming, George brought the eye patch and said, wear this.
Yeah, it was an absolute concern. They're very, very similar, even in terms of his bombastic tone and so
exactly.
Which he said that's why George got him in the movie, because he absolutely loved his voice. Which makes sense because George always put your voice. Your voice is in this mic. Your voice is in Creepshow. Your voice is in Martin. So George loved your voice as well. He loved Richard Francis. He loved your voice, so that's why he was in this film. Now that's Howard Smith. Howard Smith was a documentary filmmaker. He actually won an Academy Award.
Oh, from Martin. He did Marjo, and he did,
Gizmo.
Gizmo, that's right.
And he was a radio personality in New York, and he also wrote for The Village Voice.
Yes.
And he had done a piece on Night of the Living Dead. And then literally a week before you guys were going to start filming Dawn of the Dead, he did another piece about the upcoming filming for Dawn of the Dead in The Village Voice. So I'm assuming that's what led to his little cameo here in the film, and it's very memorable. Some of his lines are really memorable.
And those were shot at Channel 53 as well.
That's correct.
Which we did. That was the first shoot at the beginning, the second after the holiday break.
Yes.
We shot that.
January 4th, and it was in your records.
Right, and then we went to the mall.
Richard Franz, by the way, at the time was a regular on something called The Newsroom, which was here on PBS station Channel 13, which was Mr. Rogers' home.
Yes.
But there was an hourly show every night that Richard Franz was one of the commentators on, and did an incredible job.
Yeah, he said he met George originally at a party in Squirrel Hill for potential investors in the original Night of the Living Dead. And he claims that he is in Night of the Living Dead, that he's a zombie, that he actually went out there and filmed a scene where he's chewing on a bone. So I don't know. Jim Serenella would be the one to talk to you about that, but that's what Richard Franz...
Or Gary Striner.
Possibly, yes.
They would.
But Gary would know.
Well, you too, but I want to learn how to fly that helicopter. If anything happens to you, we have to be able to fly out of here.
She's right, man.
Now, another
Come on, let's go.
big contributor to this film, and it's also a little bit of a controversial subject, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up, is Gary Zeller, who handled all of the squib effects, pyrotechnic effects in the film. But there was a little issue between him and Tom Savini, where Gary Zeller told me that Savini had broken into his personal stash of squibs and had taken a bunch of squibs and used them. I think Nick Mastandrea was the first guy he actually used it on. And Zeller had to call the FBI. The FBI came out to Pittsburgh to the set and interviewed everybody. And I talked to Savini about that, and Savini said that he did not take his squibs. He was making his own homemade ones with gunpowder, plastic tubes, and rocket igniters. That's what he used to make his squibs with.
And he did. He wasn't stealing. And I mean, long before Gary Zeller, we used people like Reed Servinsky
And Tony.
And his partner Tony, and they provided squib work. So I mean, the technology was there. In fairness to Gary, though, I mean, he was licensed in essence. He was controlled by the federal government.
Yeah, he had to report.
So
this
he
stuff.
had to report these things, and so that began a kind of friction, which eventually left to Gary, leaving the set.
I was going to ask you about that because Savini told me that he left. He lost his job because he was firing a machine gun in the hallway of the hotel they were staying at.
He did.
That would have been sometime in January, but there's behind-the-scenes footage shot by Bob Langer and Ralph Langer when they were zombies on the film, and it was the night of George's birthday, which was February 4th. And in the footage, you can clearly see Gary Zeller. He's setting up squibs. He's standing behind George at his birthday when he's blowing out his candles of his cake.
Tom would know. Tom, we shot the candy glass, so-called candy glass scene. How late in the schedule? Because Gary was still there at that point.
That was sometime. I mean, it was
in
the
February?
mall. It was in the mall between January and February.
Yeah. So I think
right
shortly
January,
after those scenes, that scene in particular became like the final situation with Gary that troubled George, and so I think that's soon thereafter he was gone.
Yeah,
But I would place that probably sometime after George's birthday, That mid-February, perhaps?
We were
Is that possible?
We were out of the mall by mid-February.
Okay, well, then
our
it was-
last day at the mall was
Then he
George's
stayed
birthday,
quite.
so then
he was there quite.
He must have been
long,
around. Yeah.
he was around.
Yeah, because then you guys did.
He had other commitments. Gary oftentimes wasn't so
That's
devoted to
true.
us, so he may have flown back to New York
That's
for a
true.
period
He
of time.
did have other stuff. He did fly back to New York, and that's when Tom's would come in with his squibs
Exactly.
to do when we
Yeah.
needed them. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, Savini said that when they shot the scene of the famous head exploding in the project building,
Yeah.
that Zeller had tried to inflate it or blow it up from inside somehow, and it wouldn't work. So Tom just grabbed the shotgun and
Blew
it off.
Yeah. He built a head with stuff inside to kind of mimic what, material in the brain, so when it exploded, it would look like it. But he just took a shotgun and shot it.
Now these scenes here were shot at the Baltimore and Pittsburgh Motor Express truck yard in
Erwin, Pennsylvania.
Yep.
And once again, incredible location, free of cost.
Yeah.
This was fairly early on in the shooting, wasn't it? This was
this
still
is
in
the first half.
mid-November.
Yeah.
77.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. And we had those Mopars with the dichroic lights to fill in.
You just saw one flash with
Right,
the frame
exactly,
rate.
yeah, because the cabs were so dark, you just had to fill it with lights. So.
That, and we had our typical overcast
Yeah, typical
Pittsburgh weather, so we had
overcast.
no chance of contrast.
And it's, November, so there's not many hours of daylight, so, by 4:30 or so, we were,
It was
getting
starting
too
to get dark.
Yeah, and it was overcast to begin with, a few sunny days in this show. In this version, there's Tom
There's Tom
Savini.
Savini.
He doing a stunt. Oh,
Yeah, Savini and Zeller were using two different types of blood.
yes.
Savini was using the 3M blood, which was created by a makeup artist out in California decades ago.
That
And
one would
Zeller
wash off. You could wash that one.
You could wash it off?
Zeller's you could not.
Yeah, he used something he called it Z blood, and it was grittier. It was.
Yeah, it had little bits of stuff in it. I think
Yeah.
it was paint because I got it on my coat, and I after 2 dry cleanings, it never came out. So
It did, however, photograph
Yes,
slightly better than Tom's.
That's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Yeah, it was thicker, and it had little bits of bristle.
It had
stuff in
density.
Yeah,
It had a kind of color density
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Tom's didn't quite have.
See, shots like that on top of the mall, those are not in George's version.
Right,
So Dario
exactly.
used a lot of those shots, like approaching the mall
Yep.
and things like that are different.
Although in this version, they only block one entrance.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, they
That's
don't
right.
do the front end. I mean, you see it later. You see the front entrance block, but here they drive in and they do the back entrance.
I think we actually ran over somebody in that shot. We backed him going.
They suffered for their art.
He seemed fine afterwards. We got him back to his car.
You still have that coat, Tom, with the
No,
Z blood on it?
I'm sorry I got rid of it, but it was a beige coat and there was just red spots all over it, so I couldn't wear it in public.
Tasso's younger brother, Christian Stavrakis, he still has Tasso's jacket that he wore in the scene where he's the biker and he gets disemboweled.
Oh.
He still has that, and it's still stained with the 3M blood inside the jacket.
That quick shot there was Bob Miller, who was an executive vice president at PNC Bank,
Oh,
Was he?
who came out to be a zombie.
huh.
Now, was it one of these scenes, Mike, that you got shot by the blank wad?
I got shot all the time.
Oh,
I was about to reminisce as I looked at some of those shots of Scotty firing. That was one where I got hit. There's Tasso again getting hit.
Well, even in the project, you'd say shoot here, and it'd be right to his hand, right close to camera. Like, ooh. Or in the leg. I got a couple in the leg. He got a couple in the leg. We were on jeans, so it wasn't so bad. But
And we were speaking of Gary Zeller. There was a point in time where we were shooting, and the blanks were being loaded into the guns, and we had at one point when Gary was absent on set, but he left behind his blanks, we had a gun wrangler, Clayton Hill, who was one of the chief zombies, who wears that white
Sweater vest.
But he was our gun wrangler in essence, and we controlled the guns, and he was ex-military, so he was quite good. He knew how to load properly. He actually found a live round in the blank box left behind by Mr. Zeller. And I thankfully...
Now, I did ask Zeller about that, and he said that they had rounds that were made to look like a live round for realism. And he said possibly that's what you guys were referring to. So that's Gary Zeller's version. Yeah. Which Zeller was a great interview. I mean, he was very detailed.
I'm sure.
But we had prop boxes of shells, and then we had blank boxes, that were usually buried in like a sawdust or whatever. They were pretty obvious. They weren't meant to be prop.
Right.
I was forever grateful, though, to Clayton Hill, I got to tell you.
Yes.
The gunfire also, I must say, is extraordinary. And it's something that George always complained about. He always wanted, great fucking guns, as he said. And part of the reason why he would go from theater to theater quite often and tell the projectionist, man, play this fucking thing loud, okay? Because he wanted something impactful. But I noticed on this version, the zombie version by the Italian group, it's wonderful. Good gunfire.
Yeah. Don't you worry about it. I won't be able to walk on it at all.
Now, Mike, George had a lot of faith in you pretty much because he allowed you to just pretty much design most of the shots and angles in this film. Is that correct?
I suppose in retrospect that's true. I mean, Tom was there with me, and I think we knew the situation, we knew the action in particular, and we worked with people like Karl Augustine to create a lighting situation, a motivation for the scene from a lighting standpoint. But beyond that, George pretty much gave us rein to create the
said,
moment.
I need a shot of this, I need a shot of that, and as far as that...
I need a shot, and And we would, as Tom said earlier, we oftentimes would say, do you want to see this? He'd say, no, man, let's get it. Let's just go get it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about...
So, I mean, from my standpoint, this being my first major motion picture, the one prior was Martin, which was much more intimate and contained. I felt honored, because this was the maestro that I'm working for. And he had that kind of confidence. So.
Well, let's talk a little bit about...
I did supply him with a lot of cigarettes, though. George loved to smoke, so I think that helped the situation.
Well, yeah, there were cigarette runs and butt buckets on the set where people would put...
Now, this was a different location from the mall.
It was indeed.
Completely different, yes.
It was an actual gun shop.
Yeah, the sporting goods store, which we play as
I think
being...
it was East Liberty?
Yeah, I think it was. It was on a Sunday night, and we all got there late on a Sunday night, because we had finished working at the mall, and there was multiple locks on the doors, and they let us in, and we shot all this stuff.
And you guys brought even out zombies, because there are scenes later in the movie where you can see zombies inside of the place.
A great location. I mean, you could never prop like this.
Yeah, yeah, really. And then through the magic of movies, well, the gate, I mean, they're aiming.
Through the gate at the mall.
But then we see, that's the gate at the mall.
That's Nick Mastandrea, by the way.
There's Nick Mastandrea, yes.
Nick told me once that he's slightly perturbed that Bob Michelucci refers to himself as the Scope Zombie. Because Nick considers himself the real Scope Zombie. Which in actuality, there's several Scope Zombies. But Nick's is very memorable because the hole in his head is gigantic when it gets shot.
And this is typical George. Okay, we're getting shots of this, just grabbing guns and getting ammo, and we're just knocking them off one after the other. Okay, we know we get shot this here, over here, do this.
See, now,
a couple there.
Those are live rounds. We understood those to be live rounds.
Okay, let's go. Now, the Brown Derby that they're about to run past here was a very popular spot. That's right. As a matter of fact, they opened up the Love Pub. I spoke with the owner of the Brown Derby, Paris Gervs, and he said they started the Love Pub because customers would come eat dinner and then they would go to other places, lounges, for musical acts and things like that, like the Holiday House, which was...
There's Michael Lucci. There's the other Scope Zombie.
Yes, that was Michelucci. And so they started the Love Pub where they would have acts come in and perform so they could keep their customers there rather than going to other places.
Okay.
And the Brown Derby could still be at the mall to this day if it wasn't for the fact that Mr. Gerv's brother-in-law, who was an attorney for the company, inadvertently forgot to get the lease renewed with the Monroeville Mall. That's why the Brown Derby left.
Oh, that's wild.
And the mall said, nope, we're going to take this space and we're going to chop it up into a bunch of other spaces, and that's what
Oh,
happened.
that's too bad.
Yeah.
That's
So the
wild.
Brown Derby could still be there if that had not happened.
It was a very popular venue.
Yeah, and the music played loudly, well, longer into the evening, so we had to watch when we were
Yeah, we
shooting
did.
stuff, yeah.
You just be ready to open up for us.
Yeah, there's all sorts of tales of drunk zombies coming out of the Brown Derby.
Cars. Why don't you use one of the
Tony
cars?
Buba, who was our sound recordist for this film, had an incredible job.
You okay to start it?
And George inherently has kind of a lack of patience for audio and wants to simply move on. And they were actually a good combination.
Well,
Tony was quick to be prepared for a scene, and
can you talk about
Offered-
working for George? Because of, he had a spontaneous nature. He had a shorthand with the crew. He had a disdain for schedules. I know you've talked about that before. What was it like with George on the set of this film? How would you describe it?
working with George, you had to learn to simply become relaxed. If you're looking for structure, if you're looking for anything that, in terms of sheer direction for a particular scene, you had to abandon those notions, because he would literally come to set oftentimes and become stimulated by the situation overall. And it could be the most casual thing. It could be, as Tom mentioned earlier, the fact that he might see some greenery within the mall and think it'd be the perfect location later for a burial scene or whatever. So you just never knew. So you have to just stay prepared and stay almost, in terms of, in a documentary notion, prepared for anything. Prepared for anything.
Yeah, in Paul Gagne's book, The Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh, which is the best book ever written about George, George says in that book that he could have just filmed forever.
Oh,
in
yeah,
this mall,
I'm sure.
because it was just such an inspiration.
Such
Every
a
day he was
visual treasure trove of, here's the wishing well, here's this, here's that. Or a zombie could be doing this here. Why don't we do a thing here? Yeah.
Right.
And he was always coming something like that.
But he shot all his films that way. I mean, they were, in his mind, never ending. I remember when we eventually shot the film Night Riders, he was about to be married on a Saturday, and we had pretty much concluded the film the previous week, but he wanted more shot material.
Oh, we were
so we
shooting
kept
till
shooting
like
up
the
to the day
day before,
before.
yeah.
And at one point he even said to me, he said, man, there goes
Tasso dying
Tasso
again.
again. He said to me, Mike, I don't know if I can get married tomorrow, man. We've got to shoot.
Yeah, he had to get fitted for a suit, and we were still shooting. And then he went away on honeymoon for 3 weeks, came back, and we shot 4 more days after that.
We shot The Raven, right?
Yeah.
Lenny Lee says The Raven, which never made the film.
Raven, no. But George rarely had the script, or if he had a script, it was just a few pages in his back pocket, so he knew what he wanted to do, and then he would come up with things.
These scenes here with the Scirocco, I believe this was when Dario Argento paid his visit.
He did. And I'm laughing about both his visit and the Scirocco.
So what are your memories of Dario's visit and the Scirocco?
This very evening, we weren't certain who that gentleman was.
Well, I knew Dario. He was walking around, and Richard.
Richard eventually introduced him as such, as Dario Argento. But he was there almost.
Not that long.
I would say about maybe 2 hours maximum. But he enjoyed his stay and asked to look through camera a couple of times, which was fine. I didn't mind.
That's right. Yeah.
And at one point he turned to me and said, "It's love, no?" And I said, "Of course it is. Of course it is."
Because he was there a couple hours and left, and then later Richard came by, and you asked him, well, would Dario have any comment? Did he say anything? And he said, oh, he was thrilled. He goes, 3 shots in 45 minutes is very good. Because in Italy, they'll spend hours, on a shot. So he was just impressed that we were working so quickly.
So the Scirocco was a
Ted McWilliams.
A gift of Ted McWilliams.
Which was a car dealer right down the street from the mall.
Exactly, yeah. Volkswagen dealer right down from the mall. Again, one of those moments where I actually stopped in one afternoon and said, we're shooting a motion picture up here at the mall, and we need a really sporty vehicle for them to use. And they said, yeah, really? And they said, what do you have in mind? I said, well, how about that Scirocco over there? And they said, sure, do you want to use it? And I said, okay, we'll use it.
Here's a dolly shot we used with pushing the golf cart. The one golf cart that they had at the mall that we were using to shuttle equipment. So we'd shuttle equipment if we're shooting from one end to the other. And we ended up pushing it because if you drove it, it would start too fast and stop too fast. So it was just easier to just have grips, push it to a mark, and that was it.
One of those crazy idiosyncrasies that George had at the time, I think it improved over a period of time, but at this point in his career, he didn't like those kinds of movements, and dollies.
Because I think he said, oh, look, we could do a doll, we could do a move here. And
right.
Okay.
But he wasn't necessarily pleased by that kind of movement.
No, he liked shots so then he could cut them all together and do it that way. Because the brilliant editor that he was, he just loved to mix all that. As you can see, beauty shots at the mall and shots of zombies mixed in with all the action and everything.
And that drove Technicolor crazy, right?
Oh, when they were cutting the negative, yeah.
Well, they more than drove them crazy. We reached physical proportions where the shots were so brief that literally the optical timer that made changes in color correction couldn't react. It was too brief. It couldn't resolve itself because it was a pure analog, mechanical function. And so as it saw a scene come through and it made its correction, the next scene would follow on its heels, maybe within frames, literally.
And it needed a certain amount of frames to readjust. And the shots were so short it couldn't do that. So they had to do them like in sections. I remember going to Technicolor for Creepshow with opticals. And no, it was Day of the Dead. I had the first reel of Day of the Dead. I had to stay back because they had to redo the first reel of Day of the Dead. And they said, "You work on that Dawn of the Dead?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, the negative cuts." "Oh, geez, I never saw so many cuts in it." So they still remembered, the conformers still remembered all the cuts. He said, "I've never seen so many cuts in a show. I had a show that had so many."
Well, tragically, when I first went to Technicolor in New York to time this motion picture, I was assigned a timer there, Bill Buzan. And we went through about 4 or 5 reels, and he made the very same comment. He goes, "Mike,
yeah,
you got so many of these shots. How does he do this?" And I said, "Well, it's his style. It works." I left for the weekend to come back on Monday to work with Bill Buzan. I mean, he was so troubled by the film because of these corrections and the brevity of the shots.
That's right.
But I left for that weekend, came back on Monday to begin the process again, and Bill had committed suicide over the weekend.
Oh my God.
Well, I never knew. I thought, dear God, I mean, I hope it wasn't this film that put him over the edge.
We whipped them and we got it all!
Did George ever share with you his feelings or his opinion of Dario's version? Because it is different. It takes out a lot of little subtleties that make it a unique Romero movie. It's a little more, some of the humor is gone from it. Did he ever talk to you about what he felt about?
He simply mentioned to me that it was Dario's version, and it wasn't something that troubled him, because, he knew that Dario had kind of a co-ownership.
That was part of the deal.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily kind of a business response by George. He just thought that Dario was even a creative participant in the process. As Tom had mentioned earlier, George had gone to Italy to do what amounted to a treatment, not a full script, but under the watchful eye of Dario. And at some point, it was Dario's money that got this off the ground. And at some point, George got some of the zombie, so-called zombie in Europe, goblin music in and listened to it. Didn't find it appealing to him. He actually used some of it himself, but he just always saw that as Dario's version. So I thought it was kind of democratic the way George took that upon himself and said, this is mine.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he believed it was better, and it was what he wanted to do.
Right.
And he loved the 217, which is the extended version in particular. And that was Dario's. It's fine.
Yeah, because without the Italian investors, without Dario, this movie probably doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
No.
It doesn't happen. And
Or
George,
at least not like this.
No.
George was forever grateful.
Yeah.
I often wondered in terms of the music by Goblin, if George could have participated, although that wasn't his style. He didn't necessarily want to participate in creating the score. He liked to react to material more than direct it at that point. But I often wondered if he had been involved with the production of the music by Goblin, whether he couldn't have found a lot of material to use in Dawn of the Dead.
Right.
Because I think the group is quite good, and they had a great history at that point. And it was that whole era of Pink Floyd and and Goblin, you know, and it still is good music.
Oh, yeah. I like the way George used it sparingly.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say sparingly. I mean, there's a lot of Goblin in George's version.
There's a heavy influence.
But I like the fact that he mixed it in with the library
yeah.
music.
Yeah.
It works better that way. The only scene I can think of where I think Goblin's score is superior to what George did is at the end with the Bike Raiders. There's like this hard rock score that Goblin has for that scene, and George uses library music instead. And I think the Goblin music works better for that sequence. But
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Goblin actually scores the motion picture. It accompanies it. Whereas I think what George used, which is library, and which is limited, is so highly repetitive.
Yeah.
It works. It certainly works. But I think Goblin was more of a score.
yeah, absolutely.
One thing in George's version, a lot of music is the Muzak sort of mall type background music as opposed to dramatic, score music. Yeah.
The Ice Palace, which only lives now.
Oops, we lost media. Oh, there it is. Now it's back.
There we go. We had a technical difficulty there. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I hope the audience doesn't see that at some point.
Oh, otherwise, we censored something.
It kind of works.
Now, where was all that shot at? That looked like a
what store? Yeah, it was
Hickory Farms type place.
yeah,
or
like a
something.
specialty.
There was an
food store.
Italian supply store there. I don't quite remember the name.
Yeah, I don't remember the name. We shot all this stuff at. That's
They had sausages and bologna.
I mean, that's a case where all go, can you be open? We want to shoot there tonight. And there's somebody there. Now this, I remember, Ken Free found this
Large bread.
He said, hey, George, how about this? How about we use this? And, oh, yeah, cool, man. So we ended up...
And that's
coming
My
up with
Father's Mustache?
That's My
That's
Father's
correct.
Mustache, yes.
Quite a unique name for a barber shop.
Yes.
And do you remember the name of the arcade that they're in?
No.
No, like on the map at the time it's listed as North American Amusement. But I'm sure
It might have only been a
that.
small little segment near the ice rink that had machines. We may have jockeyed some of these around for shot's sake. I don't remember there being a full-blown arcade there.
There were just a few machines.
Yeah, so we just used them to our benefit in terms of jockeying them
And
around.
it's like, well, is there enough, we had a spot meter we could look reflected, is there enough exposure this would photograph? I mean, who knows?
Upcoming here is the most iconic line from the film. by
Yeah,
far.
there was a PA called Dan Lupovitz, and his family was in the fur business and got us the furs. And he's now a movie producer. He produced Simpatico, which Pat Buba edited. Pat Buba, Tony Buba's brother, who's in the show later on. So from PA to producer. So you always be nice to your production assistants because you never know. You could end up working
true.
for them
That's
later
true.
on.
Frank Darabont, who is famous for writing and directing The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile. He started the Walking Dead television show.
Exactly.
I think his first film job, he was a PA on a film called Hell Night with Linda Blair.
Oh, yeah.
A little low-budget horror film. That's how he started.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk the earth.
Come on, that damn thing! Hurry up, come on!
Now, the original ending to this film was supposed to be downbeat. It was supposed to be a dual suicide.
Right.
Ken Foray and Galen Ross both killed themselves. But that got changed, and the story has always been that it was changed due to George maybe liking the characters too much, and he decided he wanted to let them live. But Tom, you shared with me once a really interesting story about the real events that caused the film to end.
I don't know
the way it does.
but I just remember we were shooting on the roof of the mall one day, and George had, and I was by the camera. Mike was always by the camera, and George was by the camera, and George had. We were waiting for something, because it took so long to get something from the mall through the hallway up to the roof, and George said, "Oh, the Italians, might want something different because Star Wars had just opened in Italy, and they were like, romanza, everybody lives. So he said they might want a different ending, and that's about all he said about it. Because I remember Mike said, well, what are you going to do? And George didn't say anything. He was non-committal one way or the other. So I don't know if that started him thinking or something else started thinking. I don't know.
George always struggled from day one. I remember the days at Fort Boulevard, just sitting around in his front office that overlooked the river,
Right.
the beautiful view.
Yeah.
And he would gaze out into the river and then look back. And he always struggled with the ending itself. A couple of points he said to me, I just want to end this fucking thing, meaning Night of the Living Dead. He just felt that it was somewhat of a bog down on what he believed his career. He wanted to make the final chapter. So he thought about that. Well, this would be a way to just fucking end it. Get rid of all of it. And then over time, I think you're right. He thought it was. He found it all kind of compelling. He liked the characters. He liked the situation. He liked the possibility of it continuing on. How do we explain the rest of the world and so forth? And so he struggled. I actually thought it was at one point in time it was the Italians who were pushing for a conclusion. They wanted this kind of fatalistic end to it all.
Oh, yeah.
But I know this, that we finally got the set, and George is still struggling, but at one point when we got ready to shoot material, so-called, for the tragic ending, he said to me, man, don't make it look good.
Oh, okay.
Because I ain't going to use this shit.
How to stay alive.
And so I knew then he had arrived at a decision.
Well, because we shot, on the roof of the mall before we shot in the living space, and we did a test for Galen's head going into the blade, because we shot at 16 millimeter and we shot at like 48 or something just to slow
We
it
might
down
have
a little
used
bit.
Richard Scooping even.
No, it was.
Is it RS?
It was RS. I remember it was RS, and because I didn't know the Scoopix, so I knew how to load the S. And
It was a daylight spool on the Scooping.
yeah, and it just looked like the head just exploded, and so everyone looked at it, okay, need some work, and that was it. And then the next thing, because there were shots, we had a close-up of her like opening the door with her head out and got everything, and that we never did another test, or we never did any exposure.
Exactly. Yeah, George didn't want to invest any more time on it per se. I don't even Savini pursued it because obviously it was his effect.
Right.
And George would always say, "Nay, man, let's just move on to
And
something
then
else."
one other night, Peter comes out of our little skylight that we plopped on the roof of the building and runs out and runs into the helicopter. And it's like, well, okay, they live and fly off. And I always wondered, well, how does this character Peter resolve his situation then? So we had to wait until we got into the living space, which was later in the shoot, to see how because he does contemplate it, but then he doesn't.
So they never did film a shot of him killing himself, right?
No, because I was wondering, well, how, how will that scene change from what was in the script? But we have to wait till later. But by the first half of the shoot, we knew that they were going to fly off because all the stuff on the roof was done in the first half of the shoot. And I think it was actually dawn that we shot that at dawn because
We did.
early.
Yes, absolutely.
Because most times sunsets always look better, and you always fake them as sunrise, even though they look better sunset. But that was actually at dawn because we.
And it was actually a good dawn.
Yeah, it was. Well, that's the thing, because in Pittsburgh, you never know. Is it going to be clear? Is it going to be cloudy?
Yeah. Now, these scenes, I believe, were shot on George's birthday on February 4th of 78, yeah. There's, like I said, there's footage of Bob and Ralph Langer's home movies on an old DVD. And some of the footage on there, I don't know if this was all done the same night or if this was over a period of nights, but the night that he's shown celebrating his birthday, they shot the zombies on the ice, the target practice, Tony Bubba's arm being torn off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then the famous cast and crew shot where you guys all had your shirts on and got your picture made. Yeah,
That was much of the shoot that night. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the dummies were shot with live rounds.
Yeah, I believe that was Savini that was shooting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I always thought that the best ending for the film, it should have been that Peter does kill himself, but she takes off in the helicopter alone. And as she's flying away, you can have like a close-up of the gas gauge and see that she's almost out of gas. So you know she's not going to make it very far.
But we know you're a racist.
Yeah.
Black,
Well, I was fine with flying away and behind
I'm just
her.
joking. I'm just joking.
I just thought it would have been ironic that the three strong males,
Yeah.
they're the ones who don't survive. and the female does, and she's she's pregnant with a
So
child.
here's the scenes with the Zeiss super speeds being used to its fullest.
And this is a scene that's not in the script. I remember Galen talking to George about, we need a scene about the relationship between the two.
Right.
And so it came up with that. And same with, because they changed the burial to the burial plot, that put Peter Kenfari there while they're doing that.
And so, this remains as a good example of the kind of general anarchy that goes on in George's sets. He allows contributions by almost everyone. I mean, grips, actors, DP.
Yeah.
He's free to those kinds of inputs.
A real democracy, as you once said about him.
Exactly.
And this was Di Pomodoro's?
Yes.
And this overlooked the...
That was right next to next door. Because there was on one side of it, you could look into the skating
To the
rink.
rink itself. And,
Yeah. It was literally next door.
It was a very nice atmosphere. And
Yeah.
I'm pained by the fact that it all changed so radically, that you lost the rink, it became a food court.
I know.
Pomodoro became a cigar salon or something weird.
If I ever won the lottery and became a, extremely filthy rich person, I would buy them all
And restore it.
and have it restored to the way it looked.
Thank you, Lou.
I'd find the original architects, get their plans, and have that thing restored.
Yeah, so this is just more Mike and Tom fun up on the roof by ourselves.
Yeah, hey man, get some shots of this because it's sunrise. Or maybe George wasn't even there. You just
I think we
started
just
shooting
did. We did.
It's like, it's a nice sunrise. Let's quick, let's shoot this.
Yeah.
The sky is nice. Let's just shoot this one. It's nice. See, this is not all dressed up, and I think they were doing this while we were shooting at 53 because they had to build all this up. And it was that far wall there that they would remove that would get us in and out of the set.
I believe it was Josie Caruso who had handled the costumes. She worked with Barbara Lipscher on decorating that loft set. And they got really nice stereo equipment from the Listening Post.
Oh, yeah, they got all kinds of... See, there's the front entrance, which you see blocked in the American version, but we don't see the truck blocking that.
Yeah, because when they do that in the American version, the truck hits Savini and he goes flying backwards, just like he did in the truck yard.
Yeah, it's a garbage thing. And we shot that on a Sunday morning because we could shoot at the back entrance on Sundays until noon because that's when the stores started. So all those big zombie parking lot shots were done on Sundays in the morning. And then later we would shoot on the roof and other stuff during the day on a Sunday. And during the week, too.
These shots of her doing this, was this at the beauty salon in Penny's? Or where was this?
I think we just did a conversion, actually.
It was a separate, I think it was a beauty salon around...
Yeah, there was a hair and makeup supply store.
There was something, yeah.
And it seemed to me it might have been in some close proximity to your father's mustache, maybe, or that... One of those winged areas,
Yeah, I think there were two, like barbershops or salon places in the mall. There was
so that was the actual salon. Father's Mustache was more of a cross section of America, middle America barbershop.
So that's Barth flying the helicopter, who actually wasn't a bad double for...
was not at all.
Because he has the same build and the hair was sort of the same...
I certainly wouldn't let Flyboy do that.
No, absolutely not. But I mean, for a photo double, it just worked out that he was able to do that.
Perfect,
Oh, Rudy Ritchie.
And Tom Savini.
I got trucks blocking all the entrances. Look at that. Yeah,
Rudy was supposed to be the original Ben in Night of the Living Dead. And Dwayne Jones was a better actor, so he ended up getting the role, and Rudy ended up being a zombie in the film.
George and Rudy met in college because they'd be seated alphabetically in classes, and Richie Romero, so that's how they became buddies, and continued to stay buddies. The oldest Nazi biker in the group, Rudy Ritchie.
I know we're here. Maybe we should...
No chance.
Now, even though it's not used in this version of the film, this is all Goblin score like we talked about earlier. In the American version, there's a lot of library music from Music to Wolf. And Mike, you were responsible for kind of going through those tracks and picking out some of the best ones for George.
Oh, yeah.
What are your memories of having to do that?
Again, as part of the process, I mean, that we typically went through at the old Leighton Image and then Laurel Tape and Film, was that, we didn't have large opportunity to create a score other than work from the library that we had. And so one of the libraries we had, indeed, was Music to Wolf. And sometimes I would order, maybe new selections, but I knew from the old catalog what George typically liked and what he used repeatedly. And so I would, make these pools for him. And at that time, he would oftentimes cut at home. He actually literally would do some cutting in his basement. And so I would supply him with tracks that he could cut into the film and listen to. And again, it was one of those freedoms. He would say, "You remember that scene, man, where where all the bikers are down, by the outside entrance? I need some shit for that, And so I would pull 2 or 3 takes, deliver them to George. He would try them out, either accept them or call back the next day and say, "Nah, they don't work, man. Let's try something else." It was that ongoing communication.
See, I think this score right here from Goblin works better.
I agree. It's kind of nasty and it suits the mood.
Yeah.
It's what I said about scoring versus just sitting on top.
Let's talk a little bit about George during the post, because he had a very, even though it worked fantastic for him, he was brilliant at it, he was a fantastic editor, he had an unorthodox style.
Most definitely.
When it came to editing, because he would reduce 35 to 16. Can you talk about George during the post-production?
Point of fact, this was the last motion picture we were allowed to do that by the laboratories, because it's a very difficult process in terms of how you handle the negative. So we shot 35 millimeter. I mentioned that earlier. We shot with a stock called 5247, and then we would ship this off to the laboratory. And because George wanted to work mechanically. At the time, they had something they called flatbeds, where you could actually, shoot 35, do a print in 35, and then watch it in a motorized fashion with, again, sound and so forth. But George was old school, really old school. And I don't know in terms of the history of filmmaking where you ever really cut significant amounts of footage for a motion picture on a table with rewinds. And this is somewhat difficult to visualize if you've seen these tables, but you're literally taking rolls of film, rolls of audio, and bringing them across what they called a synchronizer, which kept picture and sound in synchronous form, passed through a small little viewfinder, and then up to a take-up reel. All this you did mechanically by spinning with your arms and hands. And so it's very, very tactile, but nigh impossible to keep speed, number one, where you can understand that this is playing at 24 frames per second. But George had that uncanny knack to do this, to take 1,000-foot reels and move them across the table and make decisions about cutting and splicing, and it's beyond belief. It's something you have to watch. And I believe in Documenting of the Dead, they actually, don't they come to...
Well, the story Roy Frumkus told was that he contacted you and sent some film, and you actually shot that footage.
I think I did.
And then you sent it back to...
Yeah, you're right. In any event, unless you see this process, you can't believe it. Anyhow, getting back to the basic stories, we shot 35, reduced, because the only way to handle mechanically the way George liked to cut was to reduce it to something that wasn't pounds of film. And by doing that, you went to 16 millimeters. So you went through this optical process where you handled the film through an optical printer, and it often caused danger. You don't want to put your film through any kind of mechanical necessity unless you have to. Typically what you do is you just contact your original negative after processing with a print medium, and it's called a contact print. So it's much more gentle in the film than going through this sprocketed optical process. But we did that. And Technicolor at some point, because of the jeopardy, said, we won't do this any longer. So it actually forced George into cutting in a more traditional style of mechanized cutting on a flatbed. And so subsequent films we did appropriately on a mechanized flatbed. But George always loved his rewinds.
And he worked right to left? which is
Opposite direction also, yeah.
Actually, Technicolor had problems with one of their reduction printers when we were shooting. So that after that, it's like no more. I should also mention that during the break, George cut all the material we had shot. So everything from the projects, from the police dock, the farm, the trucks, arriving to the mall, the airport. He cut that all in those weeks between our last day of shooting through the holidays to the first again. He had this one reel, and the film was spilling off the reel, but he had cut all of that. It was like over an hour's worth of material on those rewinds with that 16mm film.
Again, the score plays so beautifully. I think.
Yeah, this is just perfect.
It meets the momentum,
Yeah. There's go-kart shots from the.
This is kind of funny the way they just sort of shoot at the gate and the gate opens.
Candy.
Yes.
You shoot at the door and break the
opens,
glass.
yeah.
Do you guys remember what store that was?
One of the designer jean shop.
Yeah.
Lord knows what it was called at the time.
Stores.
Pink Lady or something of that sort. There's a million of them. Hughes and Hatcher. Back then.
That's Sarah Venable, right?
Sarah Venable.
And Ben Vanderholst.
I think they cut him out of this.
Yeah. So he falls into the teepee.
Yes.
Yeah. Then the pies.
Well, no, a reporter falls into the teepee.
Oh,
This reporter, he's by there, though.
teepee, yeah.
There's Pat Booba with the
right.
dual pies. John Kiss.
It's Tom Savini.
So you guys had bikers in the gun shop. You had zombies in the gun shop.
Now there's looks like a wallet shot. It's a low angle shot that Mike would prop the camera on my wallet to get it on the floor of the mall to get those low angle shots. He needed to raise it up slightly up, and the hi-hat was too high, and the floor was too flat, so he used my wallet just enough.
If I had my way, I would shoot everything either ground level or God's POV. Nothing in between. It's my comic book influence and
Absolutely.
and watching TV on the floor.
Absolutely. Those Dutch angles, you grew up with those.
Absolutely. It was hard not to get wrapped up in the enthusiasm of all this pillaging. I mean, when you're shooting, because again, we were somewhat unscripted. George would say, "Man, the cats are good over here. Go out and see if you can grab those guys." And we just run around getting shots.
Grab some, okay, guys, grab some of this stuff. Okay, take some of that.
I mean, it was so hectic. But I mean, at some point, you felt like you wanted to join in and also pillage the whole place.
Well, what were you going to say?
I was going to say this is different than this is not his lines. This is ours. Is not in the script.
That's true.
Later,
yes.
Now, the upcoming scene where Tasso is killed and his stomach is torn open and all the intestines come out. Do you guys remember where those came from by any chance? Because there was actually in the mall annex, there was a butcher shop called Tom's Butcher Block, and it was spelled B-L-O-K. There was no C in it. I'm wondering if that's where they got those intestines from.
You'd have to ask
no one
Tom
can really,
Savini
he can't remember.
Oh, he can't remember.
Tasso, recently I was party. You were there, Tom.
Yeah,
also,
right.
We were party to a discussion about that, and I thought he actually mentioned he had got those earlier in the day. He actually washed them.
Oh,
Yes,
Tasso did. Yeah.
He took all the waste material and so forth. Yeah. But I thought it was maybe more of a Wilkins Township, East Pittsburgh butcher that he got this from.
Maybe.
Now, when this film, the first time that cast and crew got to watch it all together was in the fall of '78 at Chatham Cinema.
Oh, that was George's hand.
That was George's hand.
Yeah.
What are your memories of that first screening downtown?
That wasn't the first significant screening. We had some so-called interlocks where we had separate picture, separate sound. That he had a few select screenings at Fort Pitt Boulevard in our studio. That was the first major one. I mean, actually, we had one upstairs earlier, maybe on a few reels with audience. But the first front-to-back cut, which is probably the 217, was in our studio, and he had a number of cast and crew members there, some invited audience. And that was the first occasion where I realized what we had done in terms of this motion picture and how we had frightened people to death.
Yes.
Because
That was in
within
George's hand and my sweater.
yes, yeah, Tom's sweater. Within moments after opening the, running the film, projecting the film, we had women running out of the audience. Seriously.
Speaking of women, the female zombie who just got her head lopped off, that was
Diane Donati.
Boom Boom Donati,
Yes.
who was the Slate Girl.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Nicknamed Boom Boom by Nick Nastandria,
Yeah, of
who was
course.
great
He
at
nicknames
naming.
everybody.
Yeah. Did Nick give Marty Schiff his nickname of Moon Baby?
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, he was appointed to that task. He assigned everyone. Dubin.
Yeah.
Tom Dubensky was Dubin.
Right.
And for some of the zombie eatage scenes, I think, one of these nights, Franco Harris actually came out to the set.
Absolutely.
He and George were good
his
friends.
This was the motion picture too that we learned. You saw those shots, those quick shots
that
of
was it.
Ken firing, where we learned a kind of lesson just through experimentation that you can't always see gunfire on the motion picture frame. And it was a momentary quandary. You get back to Daddy and say, "Oh, not there."
Yeah.
And we realized soon thereafter that with a rotating prism, if I can see the gunfire, meaning the camera person, then the film will not see it because the prism,
It's a rotating.
it gives one view to the viewer and the other view to the next view on the rotating prism to the film.
Right.
So it became something we learned with time. And I could say to George, it didn't work because I saw the gun flash, but the film would probably not see it.
Right.
So it
he
became
said-
an early lesson for us. In
So you
terms
say,
of
Mike, did you see the flash?
Yeah.
I'd say, no. Oh, good. That meant we got it because that meant it was on the film. If Mike saw it, then it wasn't on the film. So.
Now, during the
pillage.
biker scenes, the pillage, yes, our favorite director and his girlfriend at the time, who later became his wife, Christine, George Romero and Christine Romero, they were bikers, but they were dressed as Santa and an elf. What are your memories of the way George explained that? Because in the novelization, he's actually one of the bikers, Old Saint Nick. He talks about Old Saint Nick.
He had no good explanation for it. I think Tom and I were there kind of incredulous. I remember Tom saying to me, "Wasn't that George and Chris?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And subsequently, I remember saying, "Wow, what was that all about?"
I think he said he thought of this as a toy. He thought of all this as a toy, and that's what Santa.
Where'd he go?
I still didn't understand what that meant.
It was a little esoteric.
Yeah, a little too much for me.
I think Marty broke his fingers on that fall because he didn't let go of the gun.
Oh,
That's correct.
see. Oh, this is the ductwork. It's another set construction thing that
By
was built,
Matt Clancy.
which we had in the studio. at
Fort Bay
Pitt
Boulevard, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it was such an extensive set.
Yeah, it was like a big key.
So that was that in the same studio space for the loft, or was
No,
that
no,
that was in your
No,
office?
that was in the studio in the 247 in the office.
Okay.
Right. We existed at a place corporately as Leighton Image and then later Laurel Tape and Film at 247 Fort Pitt Boulevard, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 15222.
And the offices were on the 5th floor, and then on the main floor was a big studio space where they would do interlock screenings and shoot inserts and that sort of thing. And so the ductwork set was there. So, because we shot the ductwork and I think the elevator shot at the same time, because those were both at
We did, yes,
247.
because we could run over and shoot in the elevator,
Yeah,
as
there's
you
the
see
elevator
right here.
shaft right there, yeah.
There's
Mike on the elevator.
God's POV. I love it.
Yeah.
And George said when right before the film was going to come out, Mike, that you guys had to go to New York to approve the final prints, and that you got stuck in New York because of 3 Mile Island.
Yeah, we did. Well, we got stuck in New York because of New York, and it was,
What are your memories of that? Because George said you guys had to go buy like new clothes and toiletries and all sorts of stuff.
yeah. I mean, the extension of time in New York went poorly because they were most concerned about print production. At some point, a laboratory will spend all the time it feels needed in terms of timing or correcting the print to the director's satisfaction and the DP's to a certain extent. And then they say, look, we've got this incredible print run to do. And it is incredible. Sometimes it's 300 prints, and we got to get these struck. And these two frickin' creative guys are, you know, constipated about their creativity, you know.
And also, Technicolor New York was not big on making prints.
First mistake, yeah. First mistake is they're a good dailies laboratory. They're adequate in terms of building intermediate versions of the film, be it negative or interpositive. But when it comes to release printing, they're stretching their limits. They love the work, but it's stretching their limits. So anyhow, to make a long story short, they were anxious to get the film over with and printed. So at first it became intimidating. I was pulled aside a number of times by the lab manager, and not my good friend Joey Violante, but the lab manager, who will remain nameless, because he might still be alive and come and get me. And told Mike, I enjoy having you here, but you're blocking my fucking print run, okay? So I said, oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. We're just going to wrap this up now.
Anyhow, there's a number of days in New York, and then, on our way back, George hated flying. I remember we were well on our way, and we made this incredible diversion. I mean, the plane banked to the right, it banked to the left, and George said, man, we're fucking goners, man. What's going on here? And we actually didn't know until we landed that the plane was going through a diversionary move because there was the release of radium at 3 Mile Island.
There's Tasso's guts.
Yeah, a little trivia there. The zombie who's actually tearing open Tasso's stomach was Barry Gress.
Barry Gress.
Who's a friend of Tom Savini's. And
yes,
for Day of the Dead fans, he plays the corpse of Major Cooper. He's the guy laying on the table with just the brain intact.
Oh.
That was Barry Gress. Now, in 1983, Mike, you had to help out with the cutting of Dawn of the Dead for an R rating because it was going to be released in a double bill with Creepshow. Do you remember that?
Ridiculous. That's very ridiculous.
What are your recollections about having to chop the film down?
It was painful. It was most painful. And there was some odd notion, possibly of a TV sale or something really weird. And it's one of those times when you're employed by a company, you just say, okay, I'll do this, but does anyone feel it's ridiculous? Can we take a vote here? And no one speaks. And I think George was off at the time, maybe vacationing or whatever happened. And we had to kind of acquiesce to the wishes of the United Film Distribution to make an attempt at it. So yeah, we actually made an attempt to cut it to an R version. So we made a vain attempt in Pittsburgh, and then they sent me off to Los Angeles to screen for the MPAA to try to get a rating. And they were already sore at us because, George had spoken against the MPAA because of the X rating he got from them instead of, maintaining an R rating. Anyhow, I went out there with this cut, and I was told that for the first time they actually commented on a film specifically. And so they screened, and they were probably aghast. And they would say, well, these scenes like this one right here with the eating, if you could cut that back a little bit. And so I did. I literally spent the better part of a week making these trims on a print to meet their satisfaction. And we did, but I mean, what I was reduced to in terms of the film itself, it was ridiculous.
All the goodies got cut out.
Pretty much, yeah.
I think it was...
There actually many were left in, but they were so trimmed that to be ridiculous.
Yeah, I think in less than a month, UFD just surrendered the R rating and it went back to being an unrated picture.
Yeah, and I mean, and we also, so when I came back with this print,
Yeah, that was footage that was shot on George's birthday.
Yeah.
There's the wonderful clock tower.
And some of those eating scenes, I remember, were either that day or the day before, because then we had to clean them up real fast. Even though we kind of knew what they were doing, it's like, quick, we don't want
the Tasso scene, for instance, was shot late into the night, and there were walkers now above us, because we could shoot that MOS, but here they come. And how would you explain this?
and that's why, even though it didn't photograph well, the blood Savini used was good, because we could clean it up real fast.
Oh, yeah.
Leave no
It's the whole new all-you-can-eat buffet.
Yeah. There's Clayton
That's
Hill.
Clayton Hill.
Yeah, and Sharon.
And Sharon, his wife.
Yeah, this is the scene in the novelization in the script where the puppy ran down
They're coming up.
and fell victim.
Good photo.
Yeah.
Good photo.
There's Jay Stover holding
Jay
the rifle.
Stover.
What are your memories of Jay Stover? Because I've heard that he's passed away, but no one can actually confirm this 100%.
He was like our production guy in the mall. You know, we had people downtown like Zilla and the others, you know, Donna Siegel and them. But at the mall, he was in the community room, you know, where they would do stuff. So we didn't. I mean, Mike and I and George, we were always out in the mall, but he was always like coordinating stuff there.
Somewhat behind the scenes,
Yeah,
but he's also very hands-on. I mean, he wasn't beyond helping to clean up
Yeah,
and
yeah.
wrap things out.
Yeah.
A real handyman to have around.
Yeah.
He really was.
And
a damn good zombie, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, he's one of the most memorable zombies.
Yeah,
He's like
yeah.
the predecessor to Bub.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
His fascination
I
with
often
Bub.
thought that he might have been the source of stimulation for George to create Bub.
Bub, yeah.
Yeah.
Because he handles a weapon somewhat awkwardly, but here he comes.
Yeah.
But with some thought. There's some sort of recall going on there. If I can get this damn thing turned around.
Yeah, in George's original day script, there were a whole slew of Bubs. There wasn't just one, there was several.
There goes Jay.
Yeah. Yeah. There were many crew people who were pretty
Zombies.
much everybody in it in some way or another, extras or something, except, well, you hear Mike's voice, but...
I think my zombie voices are better than the ones that...
Yeah,
Could be, yeah,
speaking of that,
yeah.
Mike, you, a lot of the, now it may be different because this is the Italian version zombie.
Right, and those are Italian zombies now.
Yeah,
That's true,
Yes.
yes.
But in the U.S. version, some of those moans. Yeah, there you go.
We even did dogs. One of our favorite methods of communicating, George and I, were by barking. And if you listen carefully in some of the big scenes, there's actually a little bark going on in the back.
There, this is where it's different than the script, because now he fights back.
Denise Kiss plays the zombie right here that gets punched in the face. And that's Deborah Gordon in the sweater. She would be a featured zombie in Day of the Dead.
And those scenes in the living space, I think, were one of the last scenes we shot, which would have been the last day of shooting, I think.
Yep, February
Yeah,
14th.
yeah.
And then you guys had to do some pickup shots about a week later of the helicopter blades.
That was for the helicopter effect at Monroeville Airport, where Jim Crud gets his head sloughed up. The Optical House wanted shots of spinning helicopter
Just for
blades.
reference. For reference. Yeah.
Against the night sky. So, well, you know, the blades are black. No, that's what they wanted. So we went out. Tony went out with us because he recorded helicopter sounds, you know, the start up and the run and everything. And then we shot those helicopter blades so they could do the helicopter blade effect.
And there we go.
And there they go.
And see, in
And,
this one, it just goes to black with the credits.
That's correct.
Instead of the montage
Yeah.
that George played.
And
the
they go to
zombies
rock
in the
music,
mall.
yeah. And the credits, it's music.
This piece doesn't work for me, musically.
It doesn't.
I'm sorry.
Right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, the gonk is better.
True.
The- this was great for the scene where the bikers are actually taking over.
Yeah.
But the gonk works much better. Well, to those of you who listened to this commentary with us, we say merci. Right, gentlemen?
Yes.
Hey, Butcher's good old.
Au revoir.
Thank you so much for watching Zombie with us.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Tom.
guys. Yes.